really frustrating that because of COVID restrictions, we're having to meet online. Just for your information, we are live streaming so that the public and journalists who would be interested in what we have to say could at least follow it at home with their feet up with a cup of tea. So I won't take much time just going through our opening remarks, but I just did want to clarify just some of the mechanics of the structure of the meeting, because the last meeting we had, we didn't have everybody there that should have been there, so we weren't able to make decisions. Now, government have said only in-person meetings in these committee structures can make decisions. But if we have a decision to make in this meeting, it will be delegated to Ben Still, the chief exec, or myself. But it doesn't feel like this is a meeting where we're going to be making financial decisions here today. So I'm really hoping that everybody feels that they can make a contribution and speak. We are a large room, we are a large meeting room. So I do wonder whether people would just bear with us to do a few introductions. And before that, we'll just say who we've had apologies from: Kamran Rashid, Councillors Will Simpson and Jonathan Pryor. Also apologies from Professor David Russell. So Patsy, welcome. Gilbert representing Leeds Arts University. Nathan Lee is representing the National Lottery Heritage Fund in place of David Renwick, who sends his apologies. And Michelle from the NUJ. Francis Rafferty is subbing, so you are very welcome. So just before we do the round room, I just wanted to update you on what we've done since we last met, because time doesn't stand still. We don't just wait for each committee meeting. We want to get going. Just so you know that the Yorkshire Youth Theatre idea has picked up a fair bit of interest. Leeds Playhouse have had initial conversations with 5 producing theatres in Yorkshire who they're keen on the Yorkshire Youth Theatre idea. And I spoke to Dan Jarvis from South Yorkshire. As you know, they have a really effective and impactful youth theatre, I think in Doncaster, if my memory serves me, and he would be very happy to work with them to support that idea. So we've been offered the chance to join the Yorkshire 5 to explore Yorkshire Youth Theatre. I met the National Poetry Centre with Simon Armitage, our friend, the Poet Laureate, and Ruth Pitt, talking about the National Poetry Centres and their steering group, to talk about not just the centre, but the Young Poet Laureate Prize, to engage with diverse communities. And I said to Simon, I'd be very, very excited to work with them on that. Also to mention that I had a really great meeting with Alan Lane from Slung Low to talk about how we frame our committee and what our theme could be, and talking about mass participation. And I know that Alan's done a fair bit of that in his community. So we could potentially talk about that further, about the guiding mind of the committee being about mass participation with diverse communities at the heart of that. So it's something to discuss, because obviously we could do anything and everything, given we've 2.5 years until the next election, hopefully another 4 years. I'll be re-elected and we can look at a 7-year plan, but what do we want to achieve during that time? So trying to nail what the point, what the focus is and what we want to achieve, I think is going to be a really interesting conversation with all of you to bring your experience. So we have no further apologies. So that's really good. Now, can I get to the item 2, which is declarations of interest? This is quite tricky, because I was speaking to Caroline, who's head of governance here, about my residuals as an actor and a writer. Do I declare those? All of you will have some sort of interest in culture. And if you need more advice on where the declarations of interest could potentially sit with this committee, I wonder whether, Caroline, if you're on this call, you want to just give us the 30-second, 1-minute précis of what you're thinking around declarations of interest? Just checking she's on this call. Can't see her on my screen.
I am, Chair.
There you go, Caroline. Great stuff. You know how pesky the declarations of interest are, so I just wonder whether you could just give us a quick thumbnail of what people should be mindful about.
Yes, thank you, Chair. As members, I know this is a very new committee, and we've got members of this committee who are new to the combined authority as well, let alone local authority procedure. I hope everybody has recently had a letter from our governance services manager, our private sector reps, setting out, explaining, providing links to our members' code of conduct, and talking members through those processes. So hopefully the context is there. And in that sense, if members have any specific questions as the committee cycle, as we move through the months and items come forward on the agenda, please feel free to either contact Angie, my governance services manager, or myself to have a one-on-one conversation if you've got specific concerns. I suppose in terms of the content of the agenda today, there are a number of matters which are probably looking in principle in terms of future steps, frameworks, criteria in terms of funding, but not getting down into the specifics yet at this point. But I think it's in terms of members being mindful as we move forward through that process, in particular, where there may be instances where perhaps they have a vested interest, or your organisation has a vested interest in any of the business coming forward and the decisions being made, particularly in terms of funding decisions. And that vested interest raises concerns then in terms of the impartiality of the decision making of the committee and the approach being taken. So there may be instances going forward where members may need to take a view that they declare that interest and take that view that they shouldn't take part in that debate or that decision on that particular item. And that would be recorded in the minutes. It would be there for the transparency of the process and the integrity of the committee. But I think at this stage, I think we're probably, because we're at a macro level in terms of principles, I suppose looking at item by item, members maybe need to cast their own thoughts over that as to whether there are any issues, but because there are no specific funding decisions at this point in time, I think it's less likely that members would find themselves in that position.
That's really helpful, Caroline, and obviously members can approach Caroline if they have any concerns. Also, can I just say personally, congratulations to Seema from Bradford Literature Festival. Congratulations on MBE. I'm surrounding myself with people who have letters after their name. I don't quite know what's happening. My deputy mayor also got an OBE. So we've got loads of talent in Yorkshire. So congratulations to you. Really proud of you for all the work that you've done.
Thank you.
Okie doke. I was going to go around the room and introduce everyone, but I'm just looking on the Zoom. You all do have your name under the photo. So if everybody's happy, just so we can save time and get more chat and more discussion, shall we just crack on rather than go through names and titles and so on? And if somebody isn't aware of what someone does, please just, we are amongst friends. Just say, sorry, what do you do? And then we can just get through things more quickly. So moving on to item 4, which is the meeting, the informal meeting we held in November. As I mentioned, the admin error, we didn't have the local authority members there. And so we were in quorate, but we still went ahead, and I thought that was the best choice. And we've recorded the discussions, and you will see from those minutes that have been recorded. And I hope that there's no challenges to that meeting, and we don't need to approve them, but no recommendations on this item. So moving on to item 5, which is the economic and sector reporting. I hope Peter is on this call, Peter Glover. Around the economic data, because I do feel as a committee we need to know where we are currently and where we hope to get to going forward. And it does seem quite a contradictory picture with high vacancies but lower employment. 95,000 less employed in the sector than pre-pandemic, and that is obviously worrying, but there is because of the vacancies, there is obviously an opportunity there as well. So, Peter, I wonder if you could give us the latest economic data. I'm assuming that this is currently, in flux because of the impact of Omicron. And I would really welcome your experiences as people in the front line of the sector, how Omicron really has had, challenges, because there was a recovery before Christmas, and now that's been slightly, with Plan B restrictions, gone in reverse. So also there was some information that was requested by the committee that I think we've been able to deliver. So can I hand over to you, Peter?
Thank you, Chair. So the paper linked to this item can be found on page 7 of your pack. And the paper has two purposes, as the Chair has indicated. So first of all, it's about providing an update on the economic performance of the sector. And then secondly, it's about some of the additional information requests arising out of the first meeting of the committee. So first of all, the performance of the sector. What you will note from the paper is that a lot of the information is national in nature in terms of sector analysis. That's because most of our local information is only published on an annual basis. But nonetheless, I think there are some important messages around the recovery of the sector that I'm going to outline now. So first of all, arts, entertainment and recreation was one of the leading contributors to output growth in the overall UK economy in Q3 of 2021, and that's the latest data that we have. So it was one of the fastest growing sectors as the economy reopened, and also output in that sector, arts, entertainment and recreation, has now returned to pre-pandemic levels, and that's ahead of most other parts of the economy at that stage. And that strong growth within the sector was shared by the component parts as well. So creative, cultural and sport also saw growth. Turning to the information and communication element of the economy, which includes activities like publishing, broadcasting and media activities, growth in this bit of the economy wasn't as strong in Q3, but then again, it hadn't been as badly affected during the pandemic. So that's the output picture. Turning to the employment picture, although output has recovered, employment in arts, entertainment and recreation remains well below pre-pandemic levels, as the Mayor indicated, although the latest figures that have been published are for September, so it may have recovered to pre-pandemic levels since then. And then finally, vacancies. National figures for vacancies for the September to November period show record levels of job openings for the sector, and they also show that the vacancies were well ahead of the growth seen across the economy as a whole. So as the Mayor indicated, employment still has some ground to recover, but vacancies very strong. And as the Mayor also indicated, the figures that I've just cited don't take account of the impact of Omicron on the Plan B announcement. And the evidence suggests that because of the timing of that announcement, it's had a particularly negative effect on the sector and may have a lasting impact on the finances of some businesses within the sector. So we've pulled together some of the observations from industry bodies and what this means for different parts of the sector, and they're set out in the paper. We also have some local information about vacancies drawn from online job postings, and it does show that vacancies for arts, entertainment and recreation roles fell quite substantially in December, and that's probably at least partly linked to Omicron. But more positively, since the paper was published, we have more recent information that shows that there was quite a strong rebound in vacancies in West Yorkshire within the sector and nationally in the first couple of weeks of this new year. So there may be sort of early signs of recovery. So turning now to the second purpose of the paper, we've also provided a response to some of the queries raised in the previous meeting, and there are some other queries that we're still pursuing. But for the things covered in the paper, first of all, freelancers. We were asked for more information on the subject of freelancers. We've primarily had to rely on information relating to self-employed people within the sector at Yorkshire and the Humber level. But what that shows is we've got, as people will be aware, is a high prevalence of self-employment within parts of the sector, although that rate of self-employment is somewhat less pronounced than nationally. The second element that we've looked at in the paper, and there's more detail in there obviously, is around volunteering. And again, that relies on Yorkshire and the Humber information, but it shows that volunteering plays a significant role within the sector, particularly in sports, arts and heritage, but that it is slightly less widespread in the sector at Yorkshire and the Humber level than nationally. And then the third item that we've looked at within the paper is around higher education student destinations. So people were interested in what happened to students in our local institutions once they qualified. So we focused on the location of employment of those graduating from HEIs in West Yorkshire. And what we found is that around a fifth of people in a job in around a fifth of people qualifying were in a job in West Yorkshire 15 months after graduating in creative subjects, with a further fifth employed elsewhere in Yorkshire and Humber. And the majority of those were in sort of higher skilled roles. The paper also looks at the information showing the link between education in creative disciplines and entry into employment in the sector. This is national information, but it indicates that the link is strong. There's details there in the paper. So that's a sort of brief précis of the content of the paper. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter. I think it's really uplifting to know 168,000 volunteers in Yorkshire and Humber contributed their time to culture, and obviously that is part of well-being and part of ending loneliness as well. So it's very uplifting, but what we don't want is people volunteering when they should be paid. So it's a fine balance, isn't it? There's a couple of people on the call that I know have done an enormous amount of work around freelancers, and then I'd like to talk to our universities and conservatoires about what they're seeing in our region as well. If you'd be happy just to have a brief chat in response to what you've read, because also I know that the MU, the National NUJ and BEC2 and I think Equity were going to share some of their data as well, what they understood around freelancers. So whether that's been fed into this modelling or whether that's still to come. So I'm going to throw you into it, Philippa, if you wouldn't mind giving us an overview of what you're seeing around freelancers. Obviously, this is specific to Yorkshire and Humber. Your role is wider than that across the whole of the country. But it'd be interesting to hear what you're seeing.
So thank you for inviting me, Tracy. So generally, I think freelancers working in film and TV have, since sort of about July last year, been able to work thanks to the protocols that we negotiated with the British Film Council. So I think employment for them has been pretty consistent since that point. In fact, if anything, there's a huge skills shortage across the UK, which we'll need to seriously address if we want, to continue the pace of growth in film and TV production. I think the tricky area for us, particularly over the last short period of time since Omicron, has been around the freelancers who work in theatres and live events, who again have had a very tough period of time whilst cancellations and closures happen, and still there just isn't really any support for them, any financial support which is easily accessible anyway. So there are some funds that the government put in place just before Christmas, which certain freelancers can access, but it's certainly not all by any stretch of the imagination. And again, that is causing financial hardship and for people to think about whether or not they want to continue working in the sector, obviously, because they've had, particularly theatres and live events, have had a very tough time over the last 2 years. And so I think we feel pleased that the government put some funds in place, but a little bit frustrated still that it wasn't comprehensive enough to cover everyone who might be described as working as freelancers in arts and entertainment. So we're doing our best to obviously point people in the right direction and to support them as much as possible. But that remains the really tricky piece, I think. Does that help, Tracy?
No, that is very helpful. Thank you. And certainly our local councils have tried to support theatres to then support freelancers. So it is about that trickle down support, isn't it? Dominic, I wonder if you wanted to just comment from your position. Obviously, you represent freelancers generally, and whether you're seeing those vacancies translated into jobs in the last few weeks.
Thanks, Tracy. Hi, everyone. So in terms of, I suppose, vacancies, it's a difficult one, isn't it, when you talk about the sector and people falling within that. I think what I would highlight would be that sheer precarity, if you like, particularly over this past Christmas period that we've had. So my concern, I think, is the fact that we had lots of live performances back up, shows up and running, but you had people very much worried and concerned and scared with Omicron and the impact it meant on closures in particular. And so certainly within this patch, there were shows that you had cancellations happening, you had stoppages, restarts, and so on across the region. And whilst generally, I think venues and producers are very good in terms of honoring contracts and so on, there was a real fear, and there still is a real fear of cancellations impacting upon what they're actually going to get. Are you going to be paid if a show gets cancelled because of a variant at the last minute? So in terms of your vacancies as such, I can't necessarily comment on numbers of that, but I think certainly there is that real worry remaining. And I think, again, as Philippa said, there obviously has been attention towards that, but certainly there's nowhere near meeting those fears and those concerns that people still have as well.
Thank you. You're right about the fear of cancellation, going to work, not knowing whether you're going to have a job in the following day. Sam, I wonder whether you want to comment. You're absolutely right that sport has the same challenges.
Yeah, sure. I just, I think, when we're talking about freelancers, it does apply to the sports sector as well. Although I do think that whilst they've had the same challenges as right across this sector, there is a slow return now for freelancers in the sports sector, but much more challenge, not only for freelancers but also for independent and local authority leisure facilities, because we know that participation in physical activity and sport has reduced amongst our poorer communities, particularly during lockdown, and hasn't recovered, which means fewer people. Well, it's lack of supply side, isn't it? So just really to highlight that it's the same right across the board. Thank you, Tracy.
No problem. And certainly when we're talking about culture, sport is absolutely, a sister to theatre, dance, music. It is absolutely about participation and engagement. So don't ever feel that when we're talking about culture that sport is forgotten, because it certainly is not. I just wonder if there are any of our conservatoires or universities, our representatives want to comment on their understanding about student destinations. Just pop your hand up if you feel there's something that we're missing.
I can. I'm Lisa.
Oh, hi, Lisa.
Yeah.
Lisa, good to see you.
Hi.
Go ahead.
Yeah, it was really good to see that in there. One of the things is probably just worth clarifying in under student destinations is, I guess, the year of the graduate outcomes survey, just because there is data 17 to 18 and 18 to 19. And also just, for future planning, I guess, we're expecting some more reporting from the Office for Students on how graduate outcomes will be measured. and that's meant to be forthcoming in the next couple of months. So there'll be a new measure for graduate outcomes and the way institutions are measured on that, but that's kind of, we're waiting for that basically imminently. So I guess it's just double checking the data's the most up-to-date one. And then the second thing is there will be a new way of looking at graduate outcomes, which we're hoping, I think the government's been busy, but I think we're hoping for in the next kind of few weeks, really, institutions are.
That's incredibly helpful. Thank you. I'm sure Peter's made a note. Peter, do you want to comment on the year of your data, or is it as it looks like on 222, 17 to 18?
It is 17 to 18, but we've just received more recent data. So what we could do is just update that as part of the paper for the next meeting, just to show any change in the position. But yeah, that's correct. We do have the most up-to-date data now, but the paper has last year's data effectively.
Lovely, thank you. And destinations aren't always an accurate picture either, that somebody might be incredibly happy in their job, but it's not the job that they're trained for. So always helpful to know what our students are doing in our 9 universities. Okie doke, so if we could move on to, if everybody's happy, to move on to agenda item 6. Oh, Nat, please come in.
It was just a quick comment really on the employment figures, if that was all right. I know you wanted to talk about the destination, but I was quite interested in if there was any opportunity to sort of drill a little bit, maybe a future discussion into the employment figures, because on one level it sounds quite promising that there's vacancies and growth, but I worry that certainly in the sort of cultural side of things, we saw a massive sort of hemorrhaging of front of house and frontline jobs early on in the pandemic. We lost a lot of people out of that sector, and there's a sort of slowness to recover and recruit people back in, and maybe a reluctance for people to come back in some of those jobs as well. And at the same time, we've got a need to kind of pivot towards a whole load of new disciplines where we're really struggling to find capacity and confidence and competence to sort of work with new markets and digital and all of those kind of things, and sort of hybrid ways of working and collaboration. So there's actually quite a fundamental problem in employment at the moment, which is bringing people back in at scale and in the right direction and making those sort of careers stick, I think. So I think the figures, you know, they sort of paint quite a positive picture of growth, but I think there's some really quite fundamental problems there to do with skills, leadership, and you know, real career development for young people coming into the sector and not feeling that they're, you know, better off just becoming Amazon drivers or whatever. So I think I just wanted to sort of flag that, and I think that needs some thinking about.
No, that's really helpful. And we saw from our last meeting that digital marketing is one of the sectors that's really expanded and one of the greatest need in our region when it comes to the creative industries. That is an exploding part of the sector. So yeah, where are those career structures? That's what hopefully the Creative Catalyst and the mentoring will do as well. We'll get onto that further on into the meeting. But I am also worried that the museum sector has been really badly hit, and there doesn't seem to be that bounce back that we're seeing elsewhere. So I'd be very interested in, I haven't been to the Thackeray, so I think it's about time I came and we could have a more detailed conversation about the challenges that you're facing, particularly, you know, obviously across the UK, but in our region as well, and what can we do? So thank you for that, Nat, and something that we'll keep a weather eye on. Okie doke, so item 6. So this is around the cultural framework. So as you know, the commitment to the Creative New Deal, developing our thinking around the additional business support that we need. Oh, I'm so sorry, I've just skipped a page. So it's the cultural framework that we discussed last time we met, that we had a cultural framework for West Yorkshire that was pre-pandemic and obviously central to everything that we were committed to doing over the next few years to put the culture at the heart of the economic recovery. So we've got a few questions in there that I'd love to open up to discussion. and that we just note the proposal to revise this framework, and there is a timeline in there that I'd be up to discussing how you think that's going to sit with our commitments to act swiftly and move at speed with our committee, obviously to provide any views and comments that you have on the priorities as well. So the cultural framework, there was a lot of effort and work went into it, but it does need that refresh from our new approach post devolution and the mayor and our committee. So I wonder, could I go over to yourself or Alex, Liz, who's going to be talking us through? Oh, Jenny, I'm so sorry, I just missed your hand. Jenny, please,
no worries.
Please do come in before we go over to the item.
No, it was just, sorry, I hadn't realised that you were going to bring Liz in. No, it was really just to say that the one thing I was concerned about was I wasn't sure about the compatibility of the timescale that we're thinking about with, we're going to be getting on to item 8 and talking about supporting cultural festivals in Yorkshire. And there's some really good criteria in there, but one of them is, adherence to the culture, and relevance to the cultural framework. So that's my only concern. I mean, it's fine, but it just means that we're not going to be able to make decisions if we're going to do things in a rigorous and robust fashion. We're not going to be able to make decisions about funding applications. We're not going to do it today anyway, but we're not going to be able to make funding decisions until we've actually got the framework, and that's not going to be happening till significantly later in the year. But I just wanted to draw attention to that. That was all.
No, that's incredibly helpful, Jenny, and I'm sure there's a way we can get around that, because I know that there is a time challenge for particularly Leeds and Bradford. But I'm so grateful that you've raised that, and that timetable leads us into July, when we can get to a decision of the cultural framework, and potentially that might be too late. So thank you very much for raising it. So if I can go over to you, Liz, if you're happy to talk us through.
Yes, and thank you, Chair. You've picked up some of the changes that we would like to bring forward into the framework, so welcome any further additions that the committee might have. Can I just pick up on that point about timetable, because it's a really important one, and what we've tried to build into those dates is around doing some of the work, gathering the evidence as we talked about. And then it's the external consultation, which we have built in to be able to gather views. I think, and it'd be good to get the committee's view on this, because as you say, I think there might be some decisions that you will want to take ahead of this being completely signed off, because you want to kind of keep things moving. So I suppose the question back to the committee is if you're comfortable for that to happen, and there might be some things that we bring forward in advance, recognising the types of priorities that your committee have already mentioned. So ideally, we would do this sequentially, but if you're happy, there might be some things we might need to bring forward in terms of funding decisions whilst the strategy is being.
And certainly, I would suggest we're not waiting till July to start the work. There will be things happening before then. And if I could just flag that Nat said in the chat that the caveat on the timescale is many of the key cultural organisations will be putting in their national portfolio organisation applications March to April. So that is an impact potentially on capacity to get involved in consultations. So thank you for flagging that, and it's something we do have to bear in mind. Liz.
Thank you. So to be honest, I wasn't going to say too much more, because it's really looking to the committee for a conversation around this. I do know that Alex is also on the call. So Alex, if I've missed anything, please jump in.
The only thing I would just flag from within the paper is the proposal that we put forward to have a workshop in March around priorities. So that would be around the timing of our next committee meeting. But the suggestion is that perhaps we have that as a separate kind of focused session aside from the committee meeting, just so we can really get into those priorities in depth. So welcome any feedback on that. I've seen a few kind of nodding heads, which is great. So any feedback on that element would be super.
I would be so grateful to members of this committee to help us guide the mind of the committee. In the initial chat, as I mentioned at the beginning, with Alan, trying to think about what our priority is, what can we deliver in 2.5 years, what's the impact we want, and then what's the next phase, the next 4 years. And Helen, as my co-chair, has agreed a focus workshop would be great, because we're all really creative. We all have lots of suggestions, you know, across sports, sculpture, music, dance, art, drama. But I think it's what are the principles, what we're trying to achieve within those investment priorities as well, and EDI and our, you know, my priorities as mayor. So I think that would be good. Early March would be great as well. I think we need to, we all love working at speed, don't we, in the creative industry. So I think depending on people's diaries, whenever we can, that would be great. Jenny, and please just put your hand up if you wish to speak.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, no, just a quick point, actually. I was going to raise it earlier when we were doing the note of the last meeting, but you got ahead of me. It was just really to say that one of the things that you mentioned at the last meeting was that you're still on the hunt for people who can take up private and voluntary sector positions on the committee, particularly from Calderdale. And I just wanted to say that and I think that's got a bearing on who's going to be able to come along in March. But I just wanted to say that one of the ideas that we had when we talked about it was that we think that one of the things that's particularly important in our cultural landscape in Calderdale are brass bands. They're community organisations. They're very important. They're very popular, and they're a great part of our cultural heritage. And so, with your permission and encouragement, I'd like to approach. Or perhaps get you to approach somebody from one of our leading brass bands, because I think they would really add something different to this committee. And I just wondered, they won't be obviously adopted onto the committee, even if you wanted to invite somebody by March, but it would be lovely if we could get them along, because I think that strand of popular culture is something that we're very keen to see being part of the work that we do here in West Yorkshire. Hope that's helpful.
I appreciate that, Jenny. Thank you. And certainly there is a question mark around having a music subcommittee that is very specifically about music, the nighttime economy, but also music as an after-school provision. You know, how do we make sure all children have access to music? We know that Kirklees has got a year of music coming up, so potentially that is something to discuss as well, whether we need that music subcommittee. And Pete, workshop, good idea. Lots of good stuff in the existing framework, and thank you for your contributions to that framework. And we're not going to throw the baby out with the bathwater and start again. It is about building on what we've got. That work was really vital, and it's just about pivoting post-pandemic into the mayor's priorities and you know, going forward. Sarah.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. Just when you mention about music and after-school music, there is something called the Music Hub that's quite regional, and the Arts Council support. So there's quite a lot of information that can be gleaned from then. I'm just trying to link in as much as possible, because there's an awful lot of work takes place across the sector, and we don't want to duplicate work when we can find the information out from various partners. So I'm trying to save ourselves time and yourself time, Lord Mayor.
I'm not Lord Mayor, but I'll take it today. Thank you, Sarah. And absolutely right, we don't want to duplicate anything. And also what we don't want is to take away the opportunities for businesses that make their living delivering content, creative content across our region. We want to support those businesses, but have additionality alongside it where there are cold spots. So thank you for that. Do people feel content with this timeline? Is July, by signing off July, the draft cultural framework coming to you? Would that sound like it would be possible? I was saying to the team, only because I'm massively impatient, we can't wait till the autumn, but there is a whole process of consultations that need to go into this to create the best framework we can. But that does not mean that we can't make decisions or have initiatives or take ideas forward. Could I get a show of hands that if we're sort of relatively happy with that with that timetable? Yeah, very good. Thank you so much. Righty ho. So moving swiftly on, now going to item 7, which is supporting creative business models. You'll know, as we all do, that that additional business support to help the needs of creatives as part of the Creative New Deal is going to be important. And this this business model picks up those themes that we discussed last time: freelancers, creative co-ops. And I hope you might have had a chance to look at the report on the meanwhile spaces for creative businesses. Loads of excellent ideas there, and ideas that have been proven to work. That was prepared for us by Creative Space, so really would be interested in your thoughts on that. I wonder whether, are you able to talk us through this? Is it Alex that's the creative business model?
Yes, no, I don't mind to speak to that, Chair. Thank you very much. I mean, you've covered a lot of what I might have said in that introduction anyway, but I guess just to highlight a few other elements of the report for our discussion. And again, this is an item to really help us develop our future thinking in this space as part of that Creative New Deal and that creative, that cultural framework we just talked about. So in particular, across those 3 areas of freelancers, meanwhile space and cooperatives. So at 2.4, there are some key themes around kind of support for freelancers that the committee might want to consider. So that includes some of the things that we discussed at our last meeting, particularly around accessing mainstream business support, ensuring fair work for freelancers, and on commercialisation and intellectual property. And then, as you mentioned, Chair, on the Meanwhile Spaces item, we've got that report there, and in the front pages of that report are a number of recommendations that have been made by the report authors. So particularly welcome any reflections on those and kind of how those look. So that work has been done together also with each of the local authorities in West Yorkshire contributing to that. And then on cooperatives, again, this was highlighted at the last meeting as an area to explore. And I guess the key question around that still remains kind of what support is needed to help establish a co-op in the sector, and what are the barriers potentially to working in this way. And we've had a number of kind of useful officer level conversations to date with some cooperatives in the region, and we're exploring conversations with Cooperatives UK as a body as well to kind of take that forward. But welcome any reflections on how we further this work.
Thank you very much, Alex. Is there anyone on the committee that has experience of those meanwhile spaces, and how we could potentially build working with our council partners? Caroline. And congratulations on your new role, by the way.
Thank you. I'm sorry. You asked the question about the meanwhile spaces after I put my hand up, so it's not.
Don't worry, ask your question anyway.
But there were just a couple of observations. I think it's really useful to look at some of these recommendations here alongside one of the later papers around mentoring, because I think actually not looking at those two things in silos would be very, very useful, because I think that they do, if you're looking at creative spaces, creative co-ops and weaving in mentoring to the fabric of those things rather than having it as a standalone initiative, I think would be really useful. And the second point I just wanted to make was just to emphasize the distinction between freelancers and micro SMEs, who often are just single person businesses, but there is a distinction between those who are essentially those who are building IP and wanting to build a business, and those who are working as freelancers, for instance, as crew in the screen sector, where I think the needs and the ambitions of those two things are quite different and need to be considered slightly differently. I mean, things like a space to work. I think most freelancers who are working as crew, that's not going to be important for them at all. A micro business, which would really benefit from the sort of the mentoring support and the framework, perhaps of additional business expertise surrounding them, the opportunity to talk to businesses with perhaps more experience than they do, then I think those things are really important to those businesses. So it was just a couple of observations.
Thank you. And certainly bringing people together under one roof, there's a natural mentoring in a way, isn't there, of shared experiences or support for each other potentially. Alan, then Patsy. Alan.
Hi, thank you very much, Chair. I was just thinking about these three things together, or at least the last two, and they're all different ways of existing in the market. And I think there's a piece of work to be done here about legitimacy. As someone who's spent the last year trying to raise funds for a working men's club, actually there's an awful lot of suspicion about things that don't sit within a kind of established either charitable model or a more immediately capital model, where you go, well, that person owns that business and there is profit, and we understand why it's happening. And I think that's true of Artists Collective, of which there is still an awful lot of suspicion around exactly who's going to be responsible. How do we know our money is safe? And yet some of the most exciting models in this country are groups of people coming together and sharing that responsibility. And then the second thing around meanwhile spaces is exactly that, as we try and find new ways of existing in a kind of slightly, not to be entirely Marxist about it, but crumbling kind of financial system, where actually the idea that this is my palace and I'm going to live here for 50 years and I'm going to have a chair and we're going to be a charity actually is no longer necessarily the best way forward. And the reason why I'm raising this group of people in terms of additionality is that there is the lending of confidence and of cultural capital to say, no, these are interesting models, and you don't stand behind them financially backing them, but certainly you kind of spiritually stand behind them and say that this is valid and these are exciting new ways of doing things. And the cultural risk, at least, can be mitigated, I think.
Yeah, that's really exciting about legitimacy and new ways of working. And I think having that West Yorkshire oversight, we can potentially lead on that, because the model will get that support from our office and from the office of the mayor to say that it's a new way of working and we can potentially pilot it, trial it, and then roll it out. So we are open to all models. Obviously, we have to make sure that the money doesn't disappear with no outcomes, but certainly we need to be agile to respond to new markets and new ways of doing things. Patsy, then Deborah.
Thank you. Hello, I'm from Leeds Conservatoire. We deal with freelancers in two different ways, partly because the majority of our teaching staff that we employ are freelancers, and so we have a huge community of freelancers, as well as the fact that obviously we have students who graduate to become freelancers, and that is a big part of our work. We're also not included in the Delhi data at the moment, although I think we probably contribute more to that as freelancers than other institutions in terms of our size. The thing I was going to mention was that, and it links to a point that was made earlier, one of the things that we're really seeing at the Conservatoire is that for our students who would traditionally go on to be freelancers, we're seeing less students wanting to go down that path. And of course, the students who we're seeing drop off from that are the students who don't have the financial support to be able to look after themselves if it doesn't work out. So I think the types of students who can go out into the world and be a freelancer and feel confident and comfortable doing that, particularly with what's happening contextually during the pandemic. And the other thing to say is that for our staff and for our students who are freelancers is that it's about whether they can see themselves being a freelancer in this region. And we get a lot of people who want to be freelancers but don't necessarily see that as a possible option if they stay in Leeds. So we have a lot of students who leave, or we have a lot of staff who are taking on more teaching work in a place called London, I don't know if you've heard of it, or other cities, Manchester, etc., where they feel like they can combine the work. So the reason I'm saying all this is because I think those meanwhile spaces, I think it links to what Alan's saying, which is if there's some kind of package that we can offer to people who want to be freelancers, which actually we all contribute to, and by that I mean even just having a space that has free Wi-Fi that freelancers can use, that can basically publicize their times so that you've got a community of freelancers who are in a space, that would be brilliant. I also think if there's a way of working together so that if we have freelancers on our books who could work in lots of different places, that obviously that works in their benefit and also our benefit. And the last thing I was going to say is that actually because of COVID and from working from home and working online, we may be better at doing that now than we might have been 5 years ago. Because in terms of using spaces, in terms of meeting with people and creating a community of freelancers, rather than lots and lots of individual people feeling like they have to make it on their own. And I think with the contributions of people around this group, we'd probably be able to create a really exciting package that would convince people to stay in the region and stay in the industry.
That's quite a theme that's coming out from the conversation, isn't it? That freelancers need to have the support to exist till the next job, but also need the support of each other. And the meanwhile spaces might be the way to do that, where you've got that free Wi-Fi where you can make a brew, but there's people who are sharing knowledge and different interests, and how we do that. In the chat, Nat has helpfully added WASPs in Scotland have been doing work in creating and managing artists and creative industry spaces across 20 venues for many years, and are worth looking at. So anywhere where there's good practice and experience of how to get it right, that might be worth looking at, and we'll definitely take that away. One thing that was in the reports from the Meanwhile Spaces was there would be a website of where these spaces are. Alex, do you know if that does exist, or is that a hope?
So the website does exist. It's kind of going through its kind of rigorous prototyping stage at the moment, so people try and break it to make sure that it works properly when it's up and ready, and that should be working as well with the local authority leads, obviously, who most of the spaces that are available that kind of being profiled within that work are within our local authority kind of gift. So it's a really important partnership piece to be working closely with our local authority partners in West Yorkshire on that. Because
some LAs are good at it, and there are cold spots elsewhere. So that would be great if we could share that as soon as we have it, Alex. So obviously we can then share that with our colleagues and partners. And thank you, Lisa, for your comment about online freelance working models, design, graphic design, coding, publishing, beginning some workshops at university and developing knowledge in students and staff of the creator maker online economies. And certainly I know that Screen Skills have done a fair number of these online short courses that have been very well attended. And we saw a lot of that during the pandemic, so we're quite used to it now, aren't we? So very interested to hear what you're doing there at Leeds Beckett. So if you were happy to share, that would be great. So Deborah, Amy, and then Pete. Deborah.
Yeah, thank you. In some ways, echoing some of what's just been said by Patsy, I think the focus that often takes place around developing these spaces in urban centres, I think we also do need to look at outskirts. We need to look at outlying areas, especially in relation to accessibility and people who have less money, and in communities where we perhaps least, it's all part of that bigger picture about how we encourage pipeline as well. But also I'm really interested in this, in not being too prescriptive. And I'm saying that in response to the cooperative stuff. Having, when I first left university, we're part of a cooperative. It takes up a hell of a lot of time. There's an awful lot of focus on what it means to be in a cooperative, for example. And it just feels like we should be looking at the infrastructures that we use to support people. And we should be looking at all different kinds of models that are there to support a really agile ecology, rather than simply picking one thing that seems to be a little bit flavor of the month and trying to push people in one direction.
I totally agree with you, Deborah, and that's what I've tasked the business team with. Develop a model that is easy to do to become a co-op. It's got to be straightforward. If there are massive barriers of complexity, people aren't going to do it, because if you come from a cooperative instinct, it's because you want, you may not necessarily come from a business background with that sort of experience. So, and you may also be starting out. So, we want to make it as easy and straightforward as possible, and that's why we're talking to the co-op and other partners to make it uber simple. And like you say, different types of social enterprises. What are the options for you if you want to set up a business. And it might also be worth knowing that we've got a £6 million entrepreneur fund, which could potentially be an opportunity for creative businesses to set up. I don't know if there's someone on the call that could just share the web address with that to access that fund, just so you could maybe share it with colleagues and partners, because being an entrepreneur is often having a great idea for potentially a piece of art or music, or it doesn't necessarily have to be a thing or a product that you can put on your shelf. It can be around other ways of being creative and having great ideas that could make money. So Alex, if you were happy to find that and share that, that would be great. Amy, then Pete. Amy.
I think I'm just echoing sort of what Deborah, Patsy and Alan have just been saying about supporting artists, freelance artists, and particularly emerging students, and how we can really use those meanwhile spaces, but particularly, as Deborah was saying, in sort of the peripheries of town. So say for instance, Dewsbury and Batley, we've been trying this out there and supporting a group of emerging artists and giving them a space for them to start to bring work together and come together as a collective. And we've also been doing a bit of work with a company called the Multifactory in Italy, and they have a very good system where they move into abandoned factories, warehouses, and basically set the artists up and the freelancers up as a collective, give them the skills that they need so they can continue once the company have left, so they have nothing really to do with it after the fact, and it's all artist led and artist run. We went and we visited, and I do think it's really key, like what Alan was saying, to give them the confidence to know that they can do that together, but to facilitate them coming together. And particularly just going back to what Deborah was saying about how it makes a town feel, with having those groups of artists in Dewsbury at the moment and how we've seen them working in the space and filling those empty shop fronts, it gives the town a different feel. The locals have come to us and spoken about how much of a difference it makes to see things going on in those buildings. And I just think it goes completely hand in hand. We've got people there that are wanting to be freelance, that are wanting to pursue their ambitions to be an artist, and we've got empty spaces, and the community just uplifts from it. And just providing and facilitating that initial stage and letting them guide it. I think it's really key for towns like Batley and Dewsbury.
Thank you. And Amy, doesn't it chime with a sense of heritage and pride, because Batley Art School was really renowned and well known all over the country for its talented artists. So it's also about getting back to that sense of pride that we have something to offer, even though we're a small town. So, thank you for all the work you're doing in making the case. Pete.
Thanks, Chair. I mean, this just relates to, I think, what Patsy was talking about, people also having to leave the area in order to pursue their careers. And I think that whilst it's absolutely critical that the committee and yourself, Tracy, has consideration for supply side support for freelancers, we mustn't forget that people are not moving to London because the empty shops are of a higher standard or the workspace is cheaper. They're moving to London because the opportunity is greater. And I suppose it's just a plea really to make sure that alongside making those conditions better for freelancers, in the rest of the work of the committee, and we'll see a little bit later on about some of the criteria perhaps for investment in festivals, there's provision for a bit of a circular economy here, whereby the opportunities that this committee and you and the MCA are commissioning absolutely lead to opportunities for the freelancers and the organisations that you hope to support as well. And I think in that way, growth will occur, won't it, one way or another.
That's absolutely right, Pete. And this is about creating jobs for freelancers as well, not just allowing them to create, but to make sure that they don't leave the region because they can make a living here and have a really exciting career. Now, I'm really aware of time, so time is pressing. But just before we move on, a really good comment from Richard from Historic England saying, it's meanwhile use is a great way to think about boundaries within our organisation as a bridge to place and regeneration, and that agenda and that committee. So I think there's definitely many crossovers from our committee to others. So we'll keep that in our minds. Thank you. So if we're all happy to park that and say that we're going to look into potentially a West Yorkshire-wide way of working around meanwhile spaces, maybe understanding what we have currently and where the cold spots are and how we can work with partners to deliver maybe more opportunity. We'll move on to the item that Pete mentioned, which is supporting creative festivals in West Yorkshire. Item 8. Obviously, we need the views of you all about how we could provide financial support for cultural festivals. There are so many coming up. It feels like there's at least one a year over the next 5 years. So it's how we cut the cake. What do you as a committee think is important? What are principles? What are important principles that will decide our decisions on these investments? Obviously bearing in mind our recent commitments that the cultural festival must support West Yorkshire footprint, be part of our investment priorities, have defined outputs, give additionality, value for money, EDI at the centre of it, and hopefully share between organisers the talent and information so that when you set up a festival, you're not reinventing the wheel, you can build on the work of others across West Yorkshire, and also that evaluation process. I think it's really important. So I wonder, Liz, would you be happy to open up the discussion for us on festivals in West Yorkshire?
Thank you, Chair. You've neatly summarised there the principles that are in the paper. So just for colleagues' benefits, that's at paragraph 2.7. Where the principles are set out, and that's particularly what we would like your views on today, because obviously any public money going in to support festivals, we are looking to ensure that it does what you as a committee want it to do, and these are draft principles that we'd welcome your thoughts on as to whether we've got them right or there's things to tweak or change or add to. I think, Mary, if I may, just wanted to go back to what we talked about right at the start about conflicts of interest, and Caroline Allen saying that today we are talking about kind of principles, so there aren't specific funding decisions, but just to highlight, I suppose, for those colleagues who are involved in festivals, you may, and if you want to talk around this, you may want to consider just declaring an interest as we speak. I think that might be a good thing to do for this item if you want to come in on it. So that, yeah, there's not too much more to say apart from open up to conversations. We recognise as well, as you say, Mayor, that the festivals are over a number of years, so we have got chance to work with festivals over the next few years to shape the input that we might want to have in terms of the funding. There are a couple of festivals which are coming up sooner rather than later, and they're the ones that we flag in the paper. And if the committee are happy, we'll take some conversations offline with those festivals that we've identified. Because recognising that, like I say, that some of these are sooner rather than later, but that's not to say that we wouldn't have then further conversations with other festivals over the time period.
Lovely, thanks so much, Liz. And as Liz mentioned, it isn't just about this year's money, and if your festival is a number of years hence, then the anxiety about, well, will the money run out? If we can agree that sort of remit, we'll obviously make sure that every approach fits that remit. So there's lots of hands up, which is great. We are short of time, so if I could ask compassion for everybody else to keep your comments short, that would be really helpful. So Deborah, then Helen. Deborah.
Apologies, mine's a historical hand, so that
Right.
cuts it down a bit.
Thank you so much, Deborah. Helen.
Hi, yeah, I just wanted to pick up a couple of points on this. I think it's a good report, and I'm supportive in general of the principles. I should also, for transparency, declare a potential interest, because I sit on the steering group of Yorkshire Sculpture International, which isn't listed, but is another major festival which has been postponed until 2024 because of Leeds 2023. I think one thing is, and it goes back to Jenny's point, really, it feels like a bit of a chicken and egg thing, and that we probably need a framework to then develop funding criteria from. And also it would be good, I think, to do an audit, because there's so many festivals in West Yorkshire alone, let alone Yorkshire, to do a bit of an audit of the festivals and to understand that landscape, because it's really broad and some of them might not be as obvious but could be just as big in other ways. So to look at that. I also look, just thinking about that, there's the diversity of festivals as well, not just in the range of art forms, but in who they reach and who they're intended for, which didn't really come through in this. And I know this is an initial paper, but that kind of goes back to why we might need a framework before we can come up with funding criteria. So in essence, I'm really supportive of this. I think it's really exciting, but I do think there's kind of a bit more work that needs to be done before we can completely agree any kind of criteria.
Thank you, Helen. Jenny.
Yeah, okay, I'll start by declaring interest. I'm from Calderdale. See at 2.4, it refers to this strange thing, Calderdale Vision 2024, which makes me sound like an evangelical preacher. It should read Calderdale Year of Culture, because back when we were going after the gain share money to support our work in Calderdale on culture, was 18 months ago or whatever, we actually put down a marker then saying that because 2024 we've been 50 years old, we wanted to do some stuff, and we wanted to have a year of culture. So I think we were one of the earliest to come down with that. That's apart from Bradford Literature Festival, which obviously is nationally known and has been known for ages, and we're going to hear about that later. I agree very much with what's just been said. I guess one of the things, and in fact I wanted to put down a marker as well to say that we've just produced our strategy for Calderdale, and we think it's fantastic. And we think part of the reason it's fantastic is that it really stresses the need for culture to be part of everybody's experience, and to tell the stories of our communities and the sort of landscape and the heritage that we live in and everything. So it's an offer there, Tracy. If you'd like us to come and do a short presentation on that, much as you've got Bradford Literature Festival here at the end of this meeting, we'd love to come to your March meeting. But it was really just to say that I think, I mean, I'm reassured when you say that there's not necessarily, that the money won't necessarily run out. And I think that the principles there are okay, but I do think there needs to be something about money is one, money and funding is going to be scarce. I think I'd like to think that the difference that we could make would be to really support activities that are going on in the culture and arts sphere that are going to reach the parts that are not already being reached. So that now, because obviously you've got these really strong cultural hubs in the cities in West Yorkshire, that's fantastic, and that will continue to be really, really important. But I suppose it is special pleading, so I am declaring an interest.
Thank you.
I want to see some of this action happening in Calderdale. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. Always an advocate for Calderdale. Good on you, Caroline.
I would just echo Helen's thoughts on the audit. I think that would be really useful. If we could do it quickly. It's just that it is that chicken and egg of wanting to move on with organisations that we know need support, but doing that, with a better degree of understanding about what else is out there. I also really welcome the thoughts on sharing best practice, and I wondered whether there should be some consideration to setting up a pot of money which is about shared working. So rather than money going to individual festivals, there might be an additional pot of money which is specifically allocated to perhaps joint marketing ideas, which we talked about, I think, a little bit in the last meeting, shared good practice and shared evaluation as well. one of the difficulties with evaluation is that often different organisations use different evaluation tools, and so it's very hard to actually evaluate the sum of the whole as opposed to just the elements.
No, that's really helpful. That Creative West Yorkshire potentially as a support mechanism, and to where you can put in all the information and then take out as you need contracts, etc. Those sorts of things are quite challenging. So we've got Pete, then Sarah.
Yeah, very briefly, Chair. I mean, I would endorse Helen's words as well. I mean, I kind of think this needs probably a good bit more work, to be honest. I think really you should be thinking about the years of culture as separate things and not as festivals. I mean, you might want to think about this as a major events and festivals strategy or whatever, but the years of culture, you know, they're not the same as Bradford Literature Festival or YSI or any of those things. I would think about them slightly to the side personally, and I think your priorities as well, I still think probably need a little bit of work, because it's difficult to see in there exactly what West Yorkshire wants. Actually, what does it really want to get out of its major festivals and events, and any other festivals and events that it might be interested in supporting as well. So but I think an audit and a bit more thought probably required, really.
Thanks. And those are the challenges we're saying to festival organisers. Also, what do you want? What's the impact that you want to see once the festival has ended? So really good reminder. Thank you. So Sarah, then Alan. Sarah.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, and I'll start off with declaring an interest, because obviously if I'm from Bradford, and we've got the Bradford's Capital of Culture bid in, but also a Bradford Literature Festival, which we've supported, and Seema and the team, which, like Jenny said, is both of regional and national importance, and has such a diverse inclusivity of both participants and those that come along and enjoy the festival. But like Pete's just said, and Helen, I was just wondering about those small festival and events, and how they tap into some of this funding pot. But as my colleagues have raised that, I just want to, that was on my mind as well. So thank you very much, Chair.
Very helpful, thank you. Alan, then Dom.
Declare an interest. I'm working for Leeds 2023 and had conversations with 2 or 3 of the others, but a boy has to eat. Three small points. The first of which is I think there's room for a creative principle, slightly driving on from what Pete said. I think the Mayor's idea of mass participation, which could be turned into a sort of philosophy of cultural democracy, but certainly the idea of placing people at the centre of the story, placing people at the centre of a venture, can be worked up so that we start. There is absolutely no reason why the Mayor or this committee cannot also have creative principles that still has enough energy for artists to be able to own, and I think that's part of our responsibility to drive that on. The second of which is I was there at Liverpool 08, London 12, Somme 17 and Hull 17. I've done very well out of these things, and the thing that they allow for is a profound sector change, and I think the quality of people and the quality of money that you're able to bring to these things is not every day, and we see that in Leeds, we see that in Bradford. Just that the energy that's starting to build is brilliant, and I think that speaks to the idea of additionality. If we want the West Yorkshire to be transformed in 2.5, 3, 5 years, or 7, is it? However long you get, I think it will be, these are the machines by which they can happen. And so I would urge a closer relationship and a more meatier relationship, rather than just another grant, rather than just going, well, you can have your money or some money. Actually you go, no, how are you going to get us further down this line? Because I think that, and the third point is, if there is a risk to the mission of the Mayor's promise for culture in West Yorkshire, we might identify one of the prime risks is any one of these major festivals, and I agree with Pete that they're in 2 categories, being a failure. And I think it would be very hard for our wider cultural promise to ride out a disastrous Leeds 2023 or a disastrous Bradford 2025. And although that isn't to do with the amount of money, I wonder whether it's about the proximity between us and them, and whether we want to close that gap and be more supportive and hands-on partner. That's my time, sorry.
That's really helpful. Thank you so much, Alan. We are running out of time on this item. So if everybody's happy, Ben will be our last speaker on this. So Dominic and then Bolu.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'll be brief. No comment on the sort of creative aspect of things, just in terms of the funding that is being given and support being given really should be with the festivals and events that are truly are committed to fair working standards, and we have those implemented across the board. Really, I think it's important that there's an opportunity to show that you're supporting what is being done, and the people working there within those festivals and organizations are doing so on a proper and real agreed conditions. And a number of you know, we've been doing, creative unions have had discussions with Leeds 2023, for example, about sort of memorandum of understanding and how the organization and people they're working with as well. And I think it's the kind of thing really should be keen and tied into support that's been given. And just quickly, second point, I think there was a reference to living wage. Can I just clarify that we're talking about the real living wage as opposed to the government's living wage that they're calling the minimum wage? Thanks.
Thanks, Dominic. And I think you were going to send me the memorandum of understanding. I would like to have a look at that. Thank you. Bolu and then Deborah.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I think there's a real call for action to get something done. The cultural festival, like the Bradford Literature. So I think people are really thirsty for something to get behind. And someone who ran like a mini festival just for girls' sports, when you could say for during lockdown, it was so surprising how many people came out and how many people really got an uplift from it. And the amount of people, especially young people who'd suffered so much during COVID, really enjoyed the festival. And the amount of girls who only came to watch, who then started to participate in girls' sport was really amazing. And the people from West Yorkshire who came to the festival were at East Bailet, and we were just amazed by the fact that we'd set it up and we'd done it and gone ahead with it. Obviously, the numbers weren't at the level we'd want it to be. But I really think we want to try and get behind something that could really uplift people, because I think people do want something to look forward to. And obviously, I've heard that we need to do due diligence behind something, but I think something that could really engage young people in EDI and really grasp the areas of the communities. And in essence, haven't had a lot to look forward to.
No, thank you. And thanks for your leadership in that sphere as well. I know that you've had a massive impact on your community. From one tiny seed, look at you where you are now. So thank you for that. And of course, when we're talking about festivals, it is also about sport woven into these festivals. What is the offer as well for our communities when it comes to young people in particular? Deborah, Catherine, then Pete, then Ben. Deborah.
Yeah, I just wanted to say really that sometimes I think it'd be useful to have a bit of an interrogation about the purpose of festivals, particularly in terms of kind of meaningful reach, but also looking at how important they are in terms of legacy, which I still just don't think has enough emphasis on it. They have incredible convening power. So from where I sit in terms of culture and health, festivals and this committee's interest in well-being, which is in terms of the recruitment, that was one of the things that you were interested in, is that how we consider how we face towards those different partners in different sectors in order to achieve something more meaningful in terms of legacy. So that might affect criteria.
Really helpful, thank you. And Nathan, thank you for popping that in the chat about you were going to reinforce Pete's point, years of culture are separate, suggesting planning from now, a combined authority-wide evaluation reflection of the impact, long-term implication for the years of culture, and especially Bradford 2025 if it wins the bid. So the impact is embedded. Thank you. Catherine?
Thanks, Chair. Mine's a quick question. On criterion 1, could you clarify what does that mean? It feels like a fairly significant criterion about, I'm assuming it's each cultural festival must actively support a full West Yorkshire footprint. I'm sorry if this was thrashed out thoroughly at the previous meeting, but from my experience, festivals are usually very locally focused, and even some of these large events are still quite locally. They will have their focuses within their district. There might be elements that could be West Yorkshire wide, but what does it actually mean?
My understanding of it, Catherine, is that money allocated to a festival is for a specific part of it. It's not for running costs or wages, it's a particular element. So for example, Leeds 2023 talking about like a Women of the World event that could potentially touch all women in West Yorkshire, that they could be part of it. So it's where the money is placed, that it is not just goes into the full pot, but it's very specific. And these are the criteria that it must tick. So it has to impact across the region in a more wide sense, in a wider sense. I hope that answers your question, but thank you for raising that to make sure that that's clear. Dominic, is that a legacy hand? It is, great stuff. And Deborah, legacy hand? Yeah, so over to you, Ben. To draw us to some sort of sensible conclusion, so we can move on.
Well, I'm not sure I could do that, but what I would just wanted to say is that this paper was designed to spark a conversation, to spark this conversation. It's been really good to hear the variety of views, and we definitely need to do more work to firm up the framework and the criteria that we can use over the years to come. I think the challenge with it, of course, is that the world doesn't stop while we do this, and there are other events and various things that are going on that, for all the reasons that have been outlined in some of the comments, need some view as to whether there's going to be the likelihood of some support from the committee. So I guess what I'm really trying to do is draw attention to the second recommendation that kind of gives you a mandate to have those further conversations while we in parallel develop up the criteria, and just check that the committee members are content with that. All the points that people have made about the importance of EDI, of ensuring that the benefits of anything that is supported align with your objectives are well understood.
Thank you for that clarity, Ben. And it is about not letting our colleagues down by the slow movement of our committee. We need to make sure that we're supportive of those who are organising festivals and so on. But it is about that debate that we needed to hear from you, what you thought. So thank you very much for that. So if we are happy to move on. I'm sorry we're having to go at such a lick. There is so much to discuss. We can move on to the mentoring scheme and creative catalyst, which is Brian and Becky, Rebecca Collier's area. So thank you for the support you gave to this scheme at the last meeting to upskill middle managers to higher skill positions through mentoring, because we did understand that it's not just about getting in and getting on, but it's also about once you're in, how can you get onto those better paid jobs and develop a career, as we've discussed earlier, and also to increase diversity of the workforce and upskill those rising stars and decision makers within the creative business. So there's a few points that we'd like your thoughts on, but I'll hand over to Becky, if that's okay. Thank you, Becky.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, and good to see everybody. Yeah, I mean, I think you've kind of covered everything there, Chair, but just to reiterate, what we're really keen to get views from the committee on the mentoring scheme. So we can look at how we take that forward. Delivery due to hopefully beginning June, where we would use this particular pot of funding out of the Creative Catalyst to contract a company to deliver a comprehensive mentoring scheme for us. So we, as I say, really keen to get the views of the committee. Main outline, we've kind of suggested some conversation topics. There's 3 main points there, but the proposed model currently, as the Mayor said, is to deliver a peer-to-peer mentoring scheme to the creative industries, looking at that kind of mid-level talent and rising stars within creative industries businesses and how we can support them to move up and to really sort of increase that talent that we've got across the region. So yeah, the 3 main points are around, are there any gaps in the proposed scheme that we've outlined in the paper? What duplication is there potentially? Because I appreciate it is a bit of a saturated market across the region, so just being conscious of that, and there are some really good, fantastic mentoring schemes out there at the moment. And also the actual, I guess, the sector that we'd like to reach out to. So We have done so the accelerator scheme, part of Creative Catalyst, was just for the screen content industry, so indies, for TV film production. We'd like to widen this to the wider creative industry, so really considering culture, arts, museums and so on, live events. So really keen to get views on that. And also sport we've added on there, so whether we think that would be an important addition in terms of who we reach out to, in terms of attracting those individuals to get them onto this mentoring scheme. And the final point I'd like to make is to really think about diversity in terms of how we reach the diverse groups across West Yorkshire. So thank you, and I'll hand back to you, Chair, to put views to the committee.
Thank you, Becky. And it's really reassuring to see that the Mayor's Diversity Programme was 5 times oversubscribed. There is the appetite for that out there, and the numbers of the EDI split is really welcome. But I think widening the mentoring scheme, I think, is a good shout. And certainly where we've got talented youngsters in gaming or whatever, that they don't feel that then they're going to move to London or work for a company in San Francisco when they could work here because they've had that mentoring to go to the next level and they've had that support. So very interested to hear what the committee have to say about how we can make this mentoring scheme really work. I have asked the team to look at other models around the country, so we can pick best practice, but make sure that we don't overlap other schemes that are happening in the region. Caroline, if you want to open the conversation up.
Yeah, I had some questions actually, partly because I've run quite a lot of mentoring schemes, and so I always get asked these questions, which is, are the mentors going to be paid?
Again, this needs scoping out.
Because I think that's a really fundamental one. So Screen Skills, for instance, their guidance is that mentors shouldn't be paid on the basis that they should be putting back something into the industry. But certainly from my sector, I have a real issue with that. If you're asking a freelancer to mentor, because they're not doing it on their company's time, they're doing it on their own time, and that time would otherwise be time where they could be earning money.
That's a very good point. Good point.
That's one that I often get asked about. I would also ask whether I have no judgment on these things other than on freelancers being paid. I obviously do have a judgment on that. In terms of the mentors, do they all need to come from West Yorkshire? So if there is a particular mentoring relationship that is beneficial to the mentee, and that might be somebody who's not based in West Yorkshire, are we going to say no to that? And I would also really welcome everyone else's thoughts, I guess, on how much value I think sort of obviously Beyond Brontes is about the screen sector. I think this definitely would be great to open up to the wider creative industries, and I think also could afford us an opportunity. I don't necessarily think that you need to, or it's necessarily always beneficial to be mentored from somebody from your own specific creative sector. I've learned loads from people who work in the music business, who work in other creative industries, and I think so but I'd really welcome it. Obviously I work in I work in screen industries, and I can see those benefits, but I'd be really interested to know whether other members of the committee who work in other disciplines would equally feel that a kind of a mentorship offered by a from another creative discipline would be useful.
And my instinct is if you're a mentee in West Yorkshire, that's the criteria. And if somebody doesn't live necessarily in our region but can be a brilliant mentor, I'm not too worried about that. But very interested to hear what your thoughts are. So Seema, then Bolu.
I'd reiterate the point about payment. I know there is a whole thing about people putting back, but I think it depends on the level of the person mentoring, because not everybody, especially if they're freelancing, are going to be at that level. The other thing I'd mention is money for the people being menteed. So we've just run a project for the British Council, which was called Producers of the Future, where we brought together two groups of young women to create work, and they were being mentored at the same time. But one of the things that was quite essential to actually attract people on was also actually to make sure that we were giving a certain amount of bursary to people for their time. So I think that's another thing to just to remember, that not everybody, especially if they're freelancing or if they're just sort of starting out in the industry, they might not have the financial means to be coming onto this and leaving paid work. I think the point about having mentors from different parts of the creative sectors, creative industries, is actually really important, because it is that thing of different people come with different skills. And I think there are different categories as well, because I think one of the things that we sometimes forget is that with creative industries, it's also about the fact that these are businesses. So there are all those other skills that are needed as well. So it might be that we look to the creative industries, but equally, I think with other businesses as well, there might be people who might actually be interested in maybe giving some people a bit of mentoring around marketing or finance or whatever it may be. So I just bear those things in mind.
Thank you. And I think the support for at least your expenses, if nothing else, is important. Bolu, Jenny and Amy, then we have to move on. Bolu.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I think this has a lot of legs. As somebody who's I've done a coach and mentoring course a couple of years ago for, I think I did it over 2-3 years, and going out and seeing people, the difference it makes when they're mentored properly, just to accelerate their growth and learning. And I think there has to be a real big push on trying to get on trying to release the unlimited potential, both in the creative and the sports and the culture. And I think a mentor just lets you sidestep them landmines that will be in place if you're going to start something new. So I think really setting up that program to get the real unlimited potential in this region, like people have mentioned, there's people going in different areas like London, etc., because there is that image that if you go there, you're going to be able to bump into people who will help you on your journey. So I think really changing that story to know that in West Yorkshire, there is a way you can get forward in different industries, especially the cultural. I think it's a really big statement to make.
You're right. It's about connections as well. Jenny, then Amy. Jenny.
Yeah, I just really agree with what Caroline and Bolo and Seema have just said, and particularly about the issue about the impact, the financial impact on somebody having to give up a morning or an afternoon. The first point, so I agree with that. Second point is let's look west as well as east. You know, Calderdale's were right up against Greater Manchester. We've got quite a lot of people living in Topenden and Hebden Bridge that actually work in Greater Manchester in the cultural industries and so on. And so looking to Manchester, to Liverpool, to Oldham and so on, I think that's quite important. My final point was, I wondered whether, given what we're trying to do with this, which is to help people move up, broaden their experience, get support and everything, I wondered to what extent we'd actually thought, not necessarily about changing this programme, but whether we'd thought about a kind of slightly different model in terms of action learning sets, where it's not just one-on-one, but you're actually bringing together a small group of people over a period of time who can meet, reflect, back each other up and so on. It's just an alternative model, and I wondered if thought had been given to that.
Yeah, it could be an additional model, additionality to the mentoring. Amy?
I felt the need to share because I'm in a really unique position at the moment myself, because on the fellowships that I'm on, I get a sum of money to find a mentor for 3 sessions, and that's paid sessions. And some of what my other fellows have found is that they've picked the fellow, they've invested the money, picked the mentor, invested the money, and not particularly got exactly what it was they were wanting from the mentorship. And how you go about having those discussions with people, and how you go about monitoring what people are getting out of those sessions. And another point I just wanted to add, that Caroline sort of said about, you know, it might not necessarily be that they're in the same industry or, you know, the same field that you're in, and being sort of really specific about what stage in the career people are in. And maybe they're not really trying to discover how far they want to go, but what kind of working environment they want to be in, and where they want to be at that point in time. And not, I mean, to be, Helen at the moment is mentoring me, and a really good piece of advice that Helen gave me, sorry Helen, I'm going to steal this, is to be in the moment that you're in right now and not be looking forward to the next thing and the next thing. And I think something about a mentorship is almost like you're thinking about what's going to come next, because you're looking up to them and where they're at and the stages that they've been in. And I think I would like to just say that for myself, it's been really beneficial to think about the point in my career that I'm at right now, and how I can take and make the most of that and the environment that I want to be in.
I wonder, Amy, if you could work directly with Becky just out of this meeting, just to share your thoughts. And Helen, you're a legend. Nat.
Yeah, thanks. That was really interesting, and I think from my own experience as a mentor and mentee, a lot of when mentoring works is it's about thresholds and sort of managing boundaries and going in quite unexpected directions, discovering things about yourself. And I think that if we're talking about involving underrepresented people, and if we're talking about making culture a sort of meaningful asset for communities, I think one way that we could really answer that question in the paper about how to be distinct or differentiated is if we actually have the courage to sort of co-create some of this program with those communities and with people who aren't directly involved. There's a little bit more complicated to work there, but I could imagine this working really well if we involved more organizations in the community and actually designing the mentoring schemes and sort of co-creating some of the outcomes. And it could make it quite powerful, because it then asks the question about the benefits that culture has to specific communities, rather than just sort of getting people involved. So I'd quite like to see an element of not just different art forms getting involved, but completely different functions within the community. So some of the stuff we've done with social prescribing, for example, has had really good benefits, and I think I could see that kind of approach worked into the mentoring scheme in quite a sort of creative way.
Thank you for that, Nat. That's really interesting, co-producing. I wonder if you could also, would you mind speaking to Becky offline,
of course,
and just sharing your experience?
I think we're on LinkedIn now, aren't we, Becky? So we can do that. Yeah, that's good.
Good stuff.
Yeah,
I'm afraid I'm going to have to hurry us on. So whilst we didn't get to a complete conclusion, we've had some additionality there, so we could help us with our thinking, and trying to shape that mentoring scheme. And obviously to get feedback as well, Becky, on the cooperatives and how that's looking. So we are at the show and tell part of the meeting. I hope you were all still with us. And we've got about 15 minutes. If everybody's happy, just to go over by 5 minutes. Obviously, if you have to drop off the call, I do understand. But over to you, Pete, your presentation.
Thanks, Tracy. Actually, it's going to be me and Catherine Mitchell, who's our lead for West Yorkshire, that's going to do the presentation. Catherine will share a screen. We'll rattle through this. You asked us to talk a bit about Arts Council policy and how it aligns with West Yorkshire. I think we'll allow you to draw your own conclusions. I think you'll see there are plenty of crossovers in the strategy that we currently have. I'll also talk a little bit about levels of investment and a bit about spending review as well, just to give you some context moving forward, but really conscious that we've got one other presentation to come after this one. So if Catherine just moves that on, I don't know whether, I think, is everybody seeing the speaker notes as well?
We're seeing the next slide to the right. So we've got one screen, Let's Create, and then we are the National Development Agency.
Yeah. Okay. So Catherine, do you want to see what you can do?
Has that given you just the slide screen?
That's it, just the slide screen. Perfect.
Right. Okay.
Okay.
So I'm going to do a general overview of Arts Council and strategy, because I recognise there are people on this call that know us really well and will know all of this, and for whom this will be quite boring, and some that don't know us so well, and maybe of some interest. So we're the National Development Agency for Creativity and Culture. We've got 9 offices. We're headquartered in Manchester, not in London. One of our offices is in Leeds, and that's the Yorkshire Regional Office. I'm the Regional Director, so I look after Leeds. And Catherine is one of my senior managers. She looks after West Yorkshire amongst various other things. Our income for 1920 was 742 million quid, which is not an insubstantial amount of cash.
Sorry, Pete, we still have just Let's Create, is that correct?
Move on.
Okay, lovely.
There we go, sorry. 176 million in the north. We're an arm's length body accountable to the Department of Digital Culture, Media and Sport, DCMS, that colleagues will indeed know. And of course, they provide a lot of our grant in aid. We're also a lottery good causes distributor. So the cash that we distribute is both from the taxpayer and from the National Lottery. In 2011, our responsibilities were extended to include museums and libraries alongside arts, and we also distribute money on behalf of the Department for Education to music education hubs, which Councillor Ferraby mentioned earlier. So we'll be supporting music education hubs in each district in West Yorkshire. Our vision, Catherine, if you'd like to move on, is that by 2030 we want England to be a country in which the creativity of each of us is valued and given the chance to flourish, and where every one of us has access to a remarkable range of high quality cultural experiences. I don't think anybody would disagree with any of that, I don't think, and I think that does apply quite nicely to West Yorkshire. How we'll realise our vision. So we consulted actually for quite a while on the last strategy. We looked at a lot of data and a lot of evidence, and we've come up with 3 outcomes to work towards, and 4 investment principles that effectively underpin all of the decisions that we'll make in terms of who we will invest in and what we will invest in, what we will expect of them, and all of that hopefully to provide better outcomes for the public. And I think, Catherine, you're going to take it from here, aren't you?
I am, yes. So the 3 outcomes, and I better rattle through this really quickly. And all of this is on our website as well. Creative people, giving the opportunities for people to take part in creative activities at all points in our lives. Cultural communities, the second one, how culture is created by and with people in their communities and how it shapes those places. And then the third one is a creative and cultural country, and that's about the sector, making sure that they have the skills, the innovation and the right opportunities, the talent to be able to deliver. The next slide is just showing you, as Pete mentioned, our 4 investment principles. These are sort of intended to be like a family to be used together by the sector. And they characterize what we would see as a modern, well-run cultural organisation. And there's a lot of toolkits on our website in relation to these 4 investment principles. Over the 10 years of the strategy, Let's Create, we'll have several delivery plans, and the first one covers 21 to 24, and it's arranged across 5 themes, which you can see there. Building a fit for the future cultural sector, that is about how we support the sector to come out of the pandemic, and obviously the investment principles are a key part of thinking about how they can be fit for the future. Point number 2 around place-based approaches, I'll come on to because it's on the next slide. Increasing our support for individuals, hopefully that chimes really well with some of the things that we've been talking about today, because actually we've recognised that the trickle-down effect doesn't always work that effectively. Number 4, helping the sector to work internationally, because obviously that's been a really huge part of our sector, and the pandemic and Brexit has meant that has become even harder to do. So it's about supporting the sector to re-engage there. And then the last one is about how we will change as we move through the decade. In terms of place-based approaches, the initial part of this delivery plan has a 3-pronged approach. We're going to be offering, we have a universal offer across all of our local authorities. We will have, we will continue to work with places of strategic interest where investment has traditionally been high. And we have recently announced our priority places, and this is where we will work more intensely and send teams of staff in to work with local places where investment has been lower than we would like and engagement has been lower than we like. And we have 1 priority place within West Yorkshire, and that is Kirklees, and we'll come on to some data about that in just a moment. This slide just shows some of our key open grant schemes at the moment. I don't think we've got time to go through them all, so I'm just going to say there they are.
Thank you, Catherine, you're very generous.
And scoot on. And these are just some stats that show last year's funding for COVID recovery, the Culture Recovery Fund and our own Arts Council's own emergency response funding for West Yorkshire. 4.4 million benefited West Yorkshire from Arts Council's funding, and then just over 30 million from the government's Culture Recovery Fund. Okay, and here are some stats on our investment, more investment in West Yorkshire. National Lottery project grants, we've picked the year 1920 as it's our most recent typical year. And West Yorkshire benefited from almost 5 million in our lottery grants for that year. West Yorkshire has 48 national portfolio organisations, and you'll see the figures just below that. 24.1 million was from a per annum figure for the previous national portfolio round, and you can see that it is slightly increased from the current 1822 round. And you can see there on the slide, probably no surprises in terms of the numbers of MPOs in the local authorities. Now, this, I'm probably not going to have time to explain this, but in any great detail, but this is a table that is published on our website, and it shows this was to do with the methodology that we used for establishing who would be our priority places, but every single local authority in England is listed there, including the combined authorities. And so I've got 2 slides taken from the website. This first one here shows you the 7 combined authorities. Thought you might be interested to see where West Yorkshire lands. If we just focus on that, the second column, the average annual investment per capita. I know there's a whole load of other stuff on there, but we won't have time to look at that. But you can see that West Yorkshire actually has the highest average annual investment for, this is taken over the from 1718 to 1920, which is quite,
except for north of Tyne. So it's second
sorry,
Tyne, Catherine.
We're 1570.
Oh, yeah, why is it not put it? Oh, you're right. Sorry, I thought I put that in. Thought it put it in number order. It hasn't, has it?
No, I thought you had as well, and I on the hoof thought, oh, that's less for that one. Yeah, so that's really interesting, and I think that when you compare us, say, for something, you might expect that Greater Manchester would have more investment from us, but what's going on there is that whilst we might have significant investment within Manchester City itself, say through Manchester International Festival, the local authorities that make up Greater Manchester actually have much lower amounts compared to the hefty amounts of investment that are going into the 5 local authorities in West Yorkshire. Okay, I'm going to scoot on to the next one, because this shows, you can see the per capita investment across the 5 local authorities, and I think there were probably no surprises there in terms of those comparative amounts. Pete, I don't know if you wanted to say anything about this at any. I mean, I'm leaving out a large amount of stuff that we were going to say, but I don't know.
I know, and I'm so sorry you're under so much time pressure.
It's fine. It's fine. I mean, these are available online and people can explore them a little bit, but it's just worth noticing the need analysis on the right, and the fact that Kirklees is the only one that comes out as high need and is the only one that became a priority place in the end. So it's just sort of worth noting that, I think. But that's all from this slide.
Thanks, Pete. The methodology for priority places is published. We'll send you the link through, because if you're into data, it is actually really, really interesting. And I think this also indicates that Leeds and Wakefield have some national and regional organisations, hence their higher per capita levels of funding from us. And just back to Pete to close now. You'll be relieved to hear.
Yeah, so we've
No,
really wrapped
Seema
through
will
that.
be relieved to hear. Pete.
Yeah. I mean, just a quick note on where we are in terms of spending review and levelling up, because obviously our kind of room for manoeuvre from next year for the next 3 years is entirely down to the spend and review settlement, and we have not had ours yet. So whilst DCMS got theirs in November, we're still negotiating with DCMS as to what our settlement is. We think, well, we're fairly certain we'll get 1%, which of course, you know, in terms of inflation at, you know, 5, 6, possibly 7% is a real terms cut. We still think the North is likely to get more money one way or another because of levelling up. Exactly how much and what criteria the government might attach to us spending that, we still don't know, I'm afraid, and we may not know until possibly next month sometime. So that's a little bit of context. I expect the North to do well. I mean, I expect that West Yorkshire, given where it is at and given the strength of the sector, given the strength of what is going on in West Yorkshire at the moment, and the general ambition, not just, you know, from yourself, Tracy, but also from the member local authorities who we've seen today have all got terrific aspirations around culture. I would really hope that we'll be able to back some of that.
Thank you. That was brilliant. And if you could share the link with all our partners, that would be fantastic.
Very happy to do that.
Brilliant. Thanks ever so much. And apologies, we are going to go slightly over, but Seema, over to you.
I will just share my screen. Tracy, am I okay to take 10 minutes, or would you like me to?
As swift as you can, because I don't want to make these meetings last longer than necessary. But
No, that's
I'm sure
fine.
people would be sympathetic for an extra 5 minutes.
That's fine. I will rattle through this, and I just say if anybody has any questions, then just to ask. I'm actually going to start off with a video, because I feel like we've forgotten what live festivals are actually like. So this is actually the 2019 festival.
Good stuff. Hooray! Remember festivals. Seema.
Actually makes you a little bit dizzy, doesn't it? Let me see if I can, actually go back to my actual presentation rather than the, rather than our YouTube channel, which is now not letting me do that. Sorry. Oh, there we are.
There we go.
There we go. It shows how very inept I am when it actually comes to things like this. So I'm just going to I'm going to try to go through this really, really quickly because I'm conscious of the time. So we are now 8 years old, which feels, how did that happen? Where did the time go? Before I sort of go into the stats, I know somebody was saying earlier in terms of, what is the purpose of festivals and where do they come from? In terms of the Bradford Literature Festival, it came very much initially from a regeneration angle. So it was about placemaking and the visitor economy. It was about literacy, which I feel is the absolute foundation stone for any part of the curriculum. And it was about raising aspirations for young people. And primarily it was about creating a festival for everyone. I think and we talk about this a lot, don't we, about ensuring that actually everybody can feel that they are included. So that's socioeconomic diversity. So I'm just going to sort the stats for the first 5 years because those were our pre-COVID years. And so in the first 5 years, we got to an audience of nearly 250,000, 100,000 children and young people, artists with roots in 72 countries. And obviously we take the North very, very seriously. So 40% Northern artists and 44% ethnically diverse artists. I think the artists that we had in the first 5 years actually had roots in more than 72 countries. And the video that you just saw, that was for 2019. And from 2018 onwards, we actually started measuring socioeconomic diversity. And in 2019, 65% of our audience had a household income of less than 40,000, the national average. And 29% had a household income of less than 20,000 per annum. So the COVID years, which have been, in which everybody has had to show so much resilience. Across 2020 and 2021, we delivered 225 live events. We still managed to get to live audiences. This was actually being able to deliver it last summer and being able to deliver a hybrid festival last year. Obviously, online audiences, and we actually ran some, we had a year of almost continuous delivery, which was interesting and challenging. And I spent a lot of time thinking about hand sanitizer, which was interesting in itself. So rattling through key strengths of the festival, one is very much around talent development. We are seen as one of the really important avenues for talent development, for cultural discussions in the North, particularly in the literature sector. And I think it would be fair to say that we have impacted and influenced the national literature sector in terms of what can be achieved. For me, talent development starts from early years. So we do obviously a lot of work in communities, and that's both the community organisations, but also early years with young people. So this is one of our artists, Richard O'Neill, who's from a Roma background. My mantra for work in communities is no child left out, and I think your festival embodies that. And the other quote is from one of the teachers from 1 in a Million School in Bradford. And the quote was because she had brought a group of young girls, and she said that one of them had actually then asked for university information afterwards, something that she'd never actually have thought that this young girl would be interested in. Equality and diversity, this is very much baked into our DNA. This is the place that we started from. The idea was that if we as a festival reflected the city of Bradford with all its communities from around the world, then we would automatically be nationally relevant. We have a Creative Sector Industry Day, which we started in 2018. That was very much about positioning BLF, Bradford and the North as the place in terms of having cultural conversations, highlighting best practice, providing support. And this image of Cyrus Hussain, who got her book deal from meeting her publisher at the festival. Obviously, I've just spoken, sorry, I feel like I'm going at like a rate of knots. I've spoken about the visitor economy. International visitors are really, really important to us. And a lot of that is tied to actually the heritage strands that we run. Over the last, in those first 5 years, we had a smattering. In 2018, we could say 1% of our visitors were international, but a 20% national audience, a 30% regional audience. So it's very much about being a national festival and being a regional festival. So where are we now at this moment in time? we are certainly counted by both the press and the public as being amongst the major literature festivals in the country, alongside the likes of Hay and Cheltenham. I think where we are, though, is that we are still very much at early stages of growth. There is a lot of potential for growth moving forward. We've built up really good relationships, both nationally and internationally, over the last 8 years. And that's something we're looking to capitalise on. So 2020 to 2027, what are our ambitions? To be the International Literature Festival for England. And this came from the very lovely Sarah Crown, who's the Director of the Literature Art Council England, when we were talking about the future of the festival. And she said, well, Scotland has Edinburgh and Wales has Hay, and Bradford is the nearest thing that fits the bill. I did think Cheltenham might not like that, but that is not my job. So. And what we'd like to do, actually, in terms of capitalising on those relationships, again, we had National Lottery project funding from Arts Council England, and we're running an international project using that at the moment. But we would like to twin with literature festivals and also with cities of literature. And I've listed those who are in our sites and some of the people that actually we're already working with. And this is a different model, because this allows us to actually showcase the region without breaking the bank. And I wanted to leave you with, and very quickly, so this is a film poem that we commissioned on the topic of when all of this is over, and there were 5 film poems that commissioned. The poet was Anthony Naxaguru, and we worked with an animation studio in Manchester, who then later said to us that actually they were about to give up and call it a day. But these are all the awards that they won, and I am going to leave you with the film poem, because then people can just it's 2 minutes long.
I'm all epigenetics and indignation, minarets and oniric miracles. I'm bending over backwards to kiss my trauma's forehead, all furrowed as if it were my own son, dreaming of being believed by the leaves inside a Guy 1. The job of any parent is to prepare their children for a world without them. Fear is the only conclusive list. I remember the body mass index of each Byzantine saint. The mosque across the road looks so peaceful, so photogenic. I should get dressed for the pageant. Decay is out in force. Look, here comes another lockdown with its slow march and febrility and public address that blunders into nowhere. Since then, I've made it a habit to check the ingredients of my opening gambits, weaponizing certainty, the glittered spool of a life rule.
Well, goodness me. Woo. I think every culture committee, we all need to bring a poem. That was really terrific. And what a fantastic way to end our second culture committee outing. And apologies to our presenters that it was so squeezed at the end, but I know that everybody wants to contribute. And going forward, we're going to have a smaller working group to talk about priorities, and our next meeting is the 16th of March, but please don't be a stranger from now till then, because we can only move fast if we get that momentum as a committee. And I know that our officers are very happy to work with you, so Seema, that was a really great way to end. We have some amazing festivals across West Yorkshire with fantastic outreach, and I look forward to being part of more of these events where we can actually go out and meet people. So hopefully in March we'll meet in person. I think we're meeting at Slong Low, hopefully. Thank you, Alan. And we'll capture the chat as well, and anything we need to share, we'll share from the chat. Thank you all so very much. My favourite people, don't tell anybody else. I'll see you in March, if not before. Thank you all so much. Take care. Stay safe. Thank you again.